All right. Welcome to another episode of the Tour on Air podcast. And today I am joined by Mike Merrill, who some of you may know already. Others will be introducing him to, but he has a persona that is MKmikeyM, where he became the first person to actually, how would you call it, financialize yourself?
Yeah, I like to say I'm the world's first publicly traded person.
That is catchy. Yes. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to chat with you and kind of get into it. I think this project has, I've been doing it a long time, but it feels like it's more relevant than ever with everything going on. So, I'm sure we'll hit some of those touch points.
For sure. And this is how I also came across basically what you were doing, which is, I was looking at kind of decentralized creators and the creator economy and that lives on the blockchain, where you see creators basically releasing tokens of themselves and having their fans, sort of participate in the upside that maybe a musician, for example, would have in the future. So the financial upside, but also actually the governance of some of the decision making, not to the degree that you're doing for sure. And when I was researching, social tokens, it's called, in the kind of Web3 world, you kept on popping up in my search results as really the OG that has been doing that for so many years. So can you tell us a little bit how that got started and since when you've been doing it?
Yeah, so if I'd started later, this would definitely be a crypto project. But I started in 2008. So I looked actually somewhat recently because I was wondering, because that's also like when Bitcoin first started. And I launched my project in January of 2008. And I think the white paper came out like later that year. But
Yep.
I like to think that, the kind of impetus for Bitcoin was probably not that dissimilar from my own kind of thinking, coming out of the crash, financial markets being like, what's going on here? How do we understand this? Like there has kind of that feeling of there has to be a better way. Obviously Bitcoin's been a bit more successful than I have, but the idea that I had was like, why can't we, as a way to understand all of these massive kind of financial and economic principles, can I just apply them to myself? And so that was kind of where it started, which I was just like, what if there were shares of a person and all the things that I did were governed by my shareholders? What does that look like? And, my shareholders that when I started were my immediate friends, and family members. And as it grew, got a little scarier as it became strangers, but it also became kind of a bigger project. And and it's kind of been going on ever since.
So the impetus was for you educational, and was that like sort of self-educational, like you wanted to test those economic principles on yourself, or did you also have sort of a wider goal of, showcasing to the world, like, some of these basic fundamentals?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a very like hands-on experiential learner. So I would want to like dabble in something. So, I might do a little bit of like stock trading or something in order to kind of understand that. But even as an individual without great wealth, there's a limit on how much you can kind of play in the markets. So I was really curious about how all of it worked. And I was like, okay, so let's try to build this again in miniature. Like what if it works at the macro scale, can it work on that kind of personal or micro scale? And at the time, sort of mid 2000s, I was doing a lot of internet-based projects, mostly like media experiments with friends. And I thought that this thing that I was making, I thought it was going to be more about my projects, and more about like, hey, what are all the things that we're working on together? Let's use this as an organizing principle, a little bit more DAO-like, kind of like what you were talking about in the intro. But what happened was, I like to say like the invisible hand of the market kind of pushed it more towards control of my personal life. Because when those questions started coming up, that's when people got super excited and really engaged. And so I just kind of followed that interest further and further until, well, I'm sure we'll get into some of the more out there decisions that I put up for shareholder vote.
And, just briefly, just technically for those who are interested in asking themselves, well, how do you even do that? Like, did you create like an organization, like a, limited
So yeah,
company
in the
and
United
then
States, if
distributed
I was a
shares?
company, yep, sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt. In the United States, in a company, if I made a company, I wouldn't be allowed to sell shares in it without registering those as a
true.
security. And so
Yeah.
I decided that I'm not a company, I'm a person. And so these shares are more, it's a little bit more of like a metaphor, right? It's basically what you're
Hmm.
buying is a vote on this website. So it's a little
Okay.
bit of a game. You could think of it like that way.
Hmm.
It's a game that I take very seriously, but it's not quite actually a financial instrument as much as it's a model of a
Yep.
financial instrument. And we all sort of agree to treat it very seriously. And I think even that fiction translates to our kind of now how we think about money. Like as we've seen with the rise of especially many different cryptocurrencies and social tokens, I think we're understanding that there is a collective fiction in our understanding of any currency or money or any of this stuff. It's all, we invented all of it just like from our minds. We were just like, okay, this is money, let's use this. And we'll all agree that it has value, even though it's just a piece of paper or, an entry in a database. So
Sure.
in that way, I think because I and my shareholders all agree that this thing has value, and we created a really, really simple marketplace where people just put in bids and asks. It's like a trading website, but there's not even like everything's manual, right? So it's just a series of bids and a series of asks, and you have to manually select. If they mismatch, you can actually make a quick profit, doing some arbitrage and market making. But basically, what's the simplest version of this thing? And then I think the real innovation was the voting side. So it's like, okay, it's one thing to have a share price, which again is a whole psychological, like I wake up in the morning and I check my share price. I'm like, oh, how am I doing, kind of thing. But then I think the innovation is the vote side, where I get to actually write up some kind of proposal and say, should I take this action? And having, now there's a little over, I think there's close to 1,200 shareholders now, and so some of them are more active, some are less active, some are bigger, some are smaller, but it's your vote times the number of shares you own, and then that kind of determines that course of action for me.
And before we get into some of those examples, the just to talk about like the kind of financial part of it, the price fluctuates like any, I guess share price, and have there been any surprises to you in terms of the correlation between the share price and certain macroeconomic context, or does it correlate mostly to media attention, or does it correlate to the type of experiments and decisions that you're putting out for vote?
What I've seen is that I can really detect and see happen is mostly two of those examples, and one is media attention, because that
Yep.
brings a bunch more demand in as new people are interested, and then to a lesser, but kind of like, rather than kind of a spike, which happens for media attention, there'll be like a slow increase over time when there's kind of a project or something interesting going on as people kind of decide what's next. Like my stock price happens to be up quite a bit right now. I did a new auction of shares into the market, and so there was this Dutch auction, and that kind of like got people a little bit excited. There was a vote to work on this NFT project, and then I have my big shareholder kind of conference coming up. And so I think there's been a little bit more communication from me to the shareholders, and that kind of brings people back to the site. They look at the numbers, they kind of decide to trade. So yeah, I can encourage that behavior a little bit, like the more I interact and the more I'm engaged, I think the more kind of trading happens, which is exciting. But yeah, there's been times, where like if I go on vacation for a month or something like that, or disappear for a while, it'll get really quiet. There won't be any trades for a while.
So tell us about some of these decisions that you're putting up for vote. Like how has that evolved? And And you said like there was kind of like you saw the people got, you know, interested in that, and you know, is that sort of the, like, was this, you know, a pull from the shareholders into you doing that? Or what I've also read in some interviews, like, you know, was there also a need from you on a kind of a personal, you know, side, like almost a therapeutic side, or, you know, basically having more people, you know, think about your decisions and guiding you a little bit?
Yeah, so I'll start with kind of that origin story, because like I said, when it started, my initial intent of this was to help guide my sort of you know, part-time projects that I think a lot of people online have and do, right? We play around on the web with our friends in these different ways. I had a day job, and I was like, this is an organizational structure for that output. What happened was that I was moving in with my girlfriend at the time, and one of my big shareholders said, oh, we should get to vote on that, because that's going to have an impact on all the projects that you do. Like that's going to have like this echo effect on everything else. And I hadn't even thought to put that up for vote at the time, but I was like, oh, he's kind of right. And so I reformulated how I thought about it. And I decided that anything I would normally ask my friends advice for is a shareholder vote. And that way I'm not bothering them with like, what should I have for breakfast? But it's like things that I'm actually like either a little unsure of, you know, maybe I'm not always 50-50, maybe I have a preference, but I'm a little bit like, okay, what do you all think? So the first really personal vote that I put up, something I was really thinking about, was whether or not I should get a vasectomy. And I put that up for vote and kind of like wrote out all the reasons for it. And
maybe can you just briefly, for those who don't know, this is a serious, you know, like this has serious consequences. Just explain briefly what that means.
Yeah, so it's essentially to decide if I'm going to be able to have children or not. Yeah, it's a you know, minor medical procedure that eliminates my ability to have kids. So I was in my mid-30s at the time, and I was like pretty sure, you know, that I didn't want to. I was like, I felt pretty sure for a long time, and I was like, oh, I can just kind of take responsibility for this on my own. It doesn't have to be my partner's responsibility. And I decided that this would be a good vote, because I really wasn't sure. You know, I was like, am I too young to make this decision yet? Is it the wrong decision? You know, like it's technically reversible, but I don't know. Yeah. So I put it up for a vote. And yeah, it was, you know, putting something up for a vote is kind of that, it has a therapeutic value, because I have to sort of write an essay about everything I'm thinking about the topic to try to explain it in as much detail and give all the context that I can to the shareholders. Some of these people, you know, in the early days, they were all friends, but they might not know the particulars of everything. And now many of them are strangers. So I try to give them as much context. I'll tell them if I feel a certain way, you know, if I'm like, oh, I'm 70% one way or the other. And then I'll ultimately let them kind of argue it out and decide in the comments. This was a vote that there were two shareholders, my two biggest shareholders at the time. One voted yes, one voted no, and it was pretty close, and it went no. So I decided not to. And the feeling that I got out of that was this sense of relief of kind of this idea that like now that decision has been made, I don't have to think about it anymore. Like it was like, you know, it's that feeling of like when someone tells you in a really clear way what you have to do, it's just like, oh, that's easy. You know, like problem solved. The course of action is clear, and I can write that off, and I don't have to think about that anymore. And that was a really freeing discovery. And I was like, oh, what else can I apply this to? And so, yeah, it's just over time, it's been kind of like playing with this idea of how big and how small are those decisions, and kind of where's the best place to fit them. And it's kind of, like I said, it's evolved over time. There's been times when I'll do an experiment and try like kind of some super detailed votes. Like I'm currently in the process of buying a new pair of glasses. And so I was like, we're going to do this whole thing where they're going to choose the individual pair, you know, frame by frame. I'm going to post pictures, and they're going to decide on that. And that's a very like small, you know, specific decision. And then at the same time, I had this opportunity to work on this NFT project, and I put that up for vote, and I was like, essentially my employment is determined by my shareholders. So, it kind of goes back and forth between these big and small things.
And do you feel they have your interest, at sort of the core of their decision making, because they say, well, what is good for you is good for them? Or do they often sabotage? Are there people that sabotage the process and kind of just troll the process and give answers? Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of a mix of that. I used to say that I was troll proof. I don't say that anymore, because in order to really troll me, you'd have to buy so many shares, and then if you start buying a lot of shares, people would start upping their price, and basically all my friends would get rich on your attempt to try to troll me. But there have been some votes where I definitely think that I've been put in the place of being the guinea pig, where the shareholders are basically like, you try that and let us know how it goes. Like, I tried this idea of polyphasic sleeping, which is this kind of crackpot theory that you can take perfectly timed naps around the day, and then you only have to sleep like 4
every
hours,
6 hours, 30 minutes every 6 hours, something like that. Yeah.
Yep. And I will tell you, it's not true. And anyone who says it's true, people always say they gave it up because of the lifestyle, like it didn't match their lifestyle or whatever. But yeah, the human body needs to sleep more than that, and it will.
How long did you try this for?
I was gonna try it for 3 months. I think I made it a month and a half, but it basically would go like, I'd go like a week, and then I'd fall off of it. It would just crash from exhaustion, then I'd reset and try again. But I was like waking up at like 2 a.m. and being like, okay, I'm just going to go out and go for a walk at 2 a.m. because I have to stay up, for another chunk of time. It was an adventure, and I definitely ran into people at 2 a.m. that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. And, it was an experience for sure, but it is, that was definitely one where I feel like they pushed me in that direction just to see what would happen, as opposed to really being like, oh, this is the best thing for you. But most of the time, people are really invested in what the best for me is, combined with what's going to be the best thing for the share price. So it's kind of a weird combo of those two things. Sometimes those two things can be a little bit at odds. But, again, in the comments, people will say, I think this because I think it will help the stock price or the share price. And then some people are like, so I even remember one vote where someone was like, I'm not voting because I don't know what you want. And I thought, oh, that's very nice of you. I was like, that's not the point of this project exactly. But yeah, but that's a very like personal way to sort of be like, hold on.
And give us a rough idea, like, any data you can share, like how many of those votes have taken place, and what would you say are like the key categories of things that you put up for vote, like this polyphasic sleep is almost like a dare, right, in a way, like
yeah that I would put the dare in a category. I would say that there's a lot of kind of health and fitness kind of goals, like I've gone full vegetarian, pescatarian, just different diets and things like that I've tried. Politics has been weirdly a strange one. I was encouraged to become a registered Republican, which in the United States is a bit of a contentious issue, and was pretty strange for a while.
Was your vote there like, should I become a registered Republican, yes or no, or should I become a registered Republican versus registered Democrat?
I had been a registered Democrat, and so the vote was to become a registered Republican. Yeah, and so the idea behind that was, in America and probably many other countries, political party separates us more than anything else. And I think it's very strange that in the US, your actual membership is just like this little form at the post office, and you check a box, and then you're a member of one party or the other. There's no like, you don't have to actually believe anything. You can just check a box and you're a member of that party. And I thought, as the kind of personal embodiment of capitalism, I was like, should I be a member of this other party, and what does that look like? Shareholders voted yes. I never quite figured out how to do it. I kept trying to I was like, how do you be a Republican, or how Republican can I be? And I was experimenting with that a little bit. And then it was like the rise of Trump, and I said, okay, this isn't fun anymore. Can I leave? They said yes. But recently I did become a member of the Democratic Socialist Association in the US. So I'm actually a card carrying socialist now and the world's first publicly traded person. So there's, again, a bit of a disconnect there, but I try to figure it out.
The disconnect, I mean, you put it on your website into your slogan almost, right? Community through capitalism. Can you expand on
Yeah, community's always been huge for me. Like the thing that I want most in the world is to, work on creative projects with people that I like. That's kind of like what gets me excited about whatever it is. And like those can be, I don't care if those are hard problems, easy problems, or frivolous problems. Like I just want to be in the room working on things collaboratively. The capitalism part, like obviously, like capitalism has pros and cons, possibly more cons, in terms of a structure that determines how we act in our lives and what our goals are and things like that. But I don't see a very easy way to opt out of capitalism. And so my way was just to fully embrace it. And so I thought, what does it look like to just do community and with fully embracing capitalism? Because the shareholder structure is such an interesting way to define our affinity. And again, I think that was a little bit more of a bold statement back in 2008. And I think now it's really easy. Like if we can share some of the same financial interests, especially via crypto, and actually have an affinity. We like the same things because we're holding the same NFTs or the same social tokens, or part of the same groups, that are based on some of these economic principles that are building community. So I think it's become a little bit more normal, that idea of community through capitalism. But I even go all the way back to, like when you think about like a market, I go back to like, a farmer's market, it's like that level of exchange and how much better it feels to operate in that market, which is still capitalist, than like a supermarket, which is very impersonal. Like those things one is arguably better capitalism and one is better community. And so those two things, you just have to kind of find the balance of where you want to be on kind of convenience versus community, or scale versus community. I think MKmikeyM as a project works really well because it's one person, doing this experiment. I don't think it's something that should necessarily be replicated at scale for everyone. It's I think there's things to learn to apply to other places, and that I get super excited about the world of DAOs, where it's a little bit more organizational, and instead of a person being the center, it's like an idea or a goal or something that we're trying to accomplish together. That's not quite a company, not quite a person. So yeah, I think there's a lot of throughputs, but but then also, in this world, we're also seeing more kind of the equivalent of publicly traded people. And honestly, that's pretty fun for me too, to see other people that are, rising and falling and checking their prices every day.
Yeah, we've seen that in crypto, right? But also, I mean, when you're talking about DAOs and, sort of Web3 governance, Chris Dixon from Andreessen Horowitz, he I think, is quoted to say like that, tokens can orchestrate basically the different interests of a community, right? And kind of align those incentives in a way. So I wonder, like, how important do you think is the potential financial reward for your shareholders versus, just being part, in voting on your behavior?
It's smaller than crypto, but it still can be real, right? Like if you look at the stock price, it tends to stay somewhere between $5 and $6, and there's not a ton of trading volume, but the price does move. But it started at $1, back in 2008, and it rose as high as, I think I peaked at like almost $20 during one of the big rise, after a big media appearance. So there is some ability to make some money there. My older brother actually made enough because he bought it in super early, and he was renovating his kitchen and bought a new dishwasher with his after he cashed out at the peak. And so it's kind of fun because I'm back in Portland now and I get to go and visit and say like, oh, that's my dishwasher. Like I basically bought you that dishwasher. So there's, again, it's at that scale. It's at a very personal scale that I think it's going to impact people's finances. But I've been kind of experimenting in and around this idea of aligning incentives and wanting to invest in the things that I really care about for a long time. And that is definitely part of where this project came from. I've always been someone that wants to invest in, the coffee shop where I know everyone on the corner versus to go buy Starbucks stock, because I know that business, I care about it, I want it to succeed, and I know enough about it that I know it's going to expand and do really well. I watched Stumptown Coffee here in Portland, Oregon, become this massive brand that just like exploded, and I would have loved to buy some shares in them early on. What I've found over time, and I think this is still true, is that most people don't care about that. Most people prefer the community part and care less about the capitalism part. The capitalism part is an important underlying engine, but I think it works best when it's a little bit less visible and less the incentive. I'm actually like, I'd be more excited for people to become shareholders that are like, I want to participate in this weird experiment, I like things you're doing, than to someone come in and say, I think I can help, 5x your stock price and cash out really fast. So,
but you have seen some of the, I guess, shortfalls of capitalism, no, with, stock price manipulation, I read.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that's the fun part of this too, is that I want to find and explore those failure parts in capitalism. So I did I was dating someone and I gave her a stock grant. So I basically said, and I was like, just to make it simple, we'll price it based on, the pricing will be based on this date, in the future. So whatever the date is there, that'll be the price, your strike price that you can choose to buy these shares at. So I was at work, not really paying attention, and I noticed, all of these purchases of really low prices. Like all of a sudden my stock price started tanking. And I was like, what's going on? And it turns out that she basically just started tanking the price so that at the moment that we marked where her strike price would be, she just brought the price down. She just drug the price down to a level where she got to buy shares.
But how did she do that? Did she have stock that she put on the market? Did she sell?
So at the time, because again, a very rudimentary stock price, you could actually choose which offer that you bought. You didn't have to buy at the best possible price or sell at the best price. So she just went in and started essentially selling. Yeah, she had some shares and she started taking these really terrible offers, basically, knowing that she could make it up on the other side. We fixed that. Now you have to do top of the book pricing. But that was again, that was an exploit that we saw happen, and we sort of had to fix the technology and fix the rules about how that worked. Someone could technically still do that, but they'd have to buy a lot more shares to pull it off. So I would love, and I've been trying to figure out how to create a system where people could short me. I think that would be a really interesting and potentially disastrous impact. There's not quite enough trading volume, I think, to make it happen. But I do, like I said, I just had this new auction of shares, and I have a mysterious new shareholder who's become my new major shareholder. Came in, so like my top shareholder, who's someone I actually still haven't met in person, but is this guy Douglas Dollars, and he was like building up over a very long period of time, and we chatted online, and I did a video call with him, but I've never met him in person. And he just slowly over time amassed this, holding 1,000 shares, which, the next person down is 700 shares, and, drops off pretty quickly, long tail. Well, somebody came in and bought like almost 2,000 shares. And that person has not revealed themselves yet to the shareholder community. They actually agreed to do it at the shareholder conference. We're going to have a big interview with him and reveal who it is. But I'm surprised because that person also I've known who that person is for a long time, but they've never owned shares. And then to watch somebody come in and just buy a major chunk, I don't actually know why. And it reminds me of, very in the early days of the project when strangers first started buying for the first time. It's very easy to do this when it's your friends and you know everyone. And I think we've seen this kind of scaling problem even in Web3, where when it's kind of a small integrated community and people know each other, it works really well. And as things get bigger, I had somebody come in and basically just like become, my first whale, so to speak, came in, and I was like, I don't know who this person is. They live in San Francisco. They're just buying all my shares, and now they have a massive say in how I live my life. And I have no idea who they are. I'd reached out to them and was like, hey, do you want to chat? And they're like, no, I'm good. I just want to buy shares and see what happens. So,
and what do you do at a shareholder conference? Is this your first one?
No, it's changed over time. I used to just do a kind of an annual presentation where I'd kind of go over the year and give people kind of highlights. But during the pandemic, the whole project really shifted during the pandemic, where everyone was inside, and I kind of realized I have this, I don't know, I guess you like a superpower of this community of people that have always been online. We've always connected. We've always done kind of projects. So the first year of the pandemic, when we did the shareholder conference, I kind of flipped it around and said, why don't we have the shareholders give talks, and I'll kind of sit in the background and sort of orchestrate for you. And kind of, that's been kind of the push over the last, 2 or 3 years, is really saying this is about shareholder community. And I'm just kind of the hub or the reason for it, but trying to do that more and more. This year, I did a TEDx talk in October, and it came out somewhat recently. And there's, when you only have like 18 minutes to kind of tell a whole story, there's a lot of kind of things you have to kind of smash in and compact and skip. So this year, in talking to some of the shareholders, we're kind of going to try to unpack some of those specific stories. So the way we're organizing it this year is to have 2 shareholders, or 2 people really, but I think they're all shareholders, talk to each other. So it's going to be like one of my oldest shareholders with somebody I knew who I was in the Army, to kind of talk about like, oh, how did this project come to be? And then it'll be one of my shareholders and this new giant shareholder, and they'll kind of talk about the future. And then the talk that scares me the most is my current girlfriend, who refuses to buy shares or own shares at all, is going to talk to my ex-girlfriend who sold all of her shares, and they're going to have a conversation without me. That one makes me a little nervous, but what I've found is when I feel nervous about something like a vote or allowing or facilitating a conversation like that, is usually when it's a good idea. There's some value in like kind of pushing forward past those parts of being like, oh, this is going to be uncomfortable. And when I announced to all the people that we're going to have conversations, that was definitely the one people were most excited to tune in for.
What's the cadence of like decisions? Like how often do you put decisions up for vote?
I try to do kind of at least one big decision a month is sort of my minimum. Sometimes that's really hard, because if I force it, if it's something that I'm just kind of doing, to run through the motions, I think the shareholders have kind of learned to detect that. They'll be like really low kind of interest. So, and as I've gotten older, I kind of have less big decisions to make. I'm not always at a point where I have a big decision a month to make. So that's why sometimes we play around with some of the smaller decisions. We did a big upgrade on how the votes work. It used to be every question was a yes or no. So it was like I'd put up a proposal, they would vote yes or no. And now we can do multiple choice. So that opens up it makes it a little bit more playful and fun. I can give people a list of options. So there's been these kind of incremental upgrades over time. But yeah, I think the kind of ideal pace, I think, would be one big decision and maybe another 1 or 2 smaller decisions a month. I'm somebody that doesn't want to overwhelm my shareholders with, a ton of emails and messages. And so I'll put things out on social media or send like a monthly email. I think the shareholders, what I've kind of heard recently, is they want more. They don't feel burdened by it. So I'm trying to like get in the habit of being in touch a little bit more with them.
So I'm trying to figure out why on earth would somebody do this? And I mean, the only, not that I, have great skills in uncovering, other people's incentives. So I'm looking forward to your answer on it. But like, when I looked at your CV, like one thing that did stand out is like, I don't know or have probably never talked to anybody who grew up in a town with a population of 10 people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that like, that need for just, expanding your own circle and, your own community and, building these relationships. Is that at the core of why you wanted to do this?
I think it was not consciously, when I put it together, in the way that I think a lot of the things that we really get impassioned about probably come from some kind of unconscious desire that we're trying to maintain. But, I talked about that idea of community is very important. I want to be in a room working on things with people. And I do think that comes from growing up with, I read a lot. I was in a pretty isolated place in Alaska. And I get energized by being around people and watching the thing that happens when, it's not my idea, it's not your idea, but it's our idea. And I think usually our idea is the best one when the new thing happens, because it says it's a little bit of your thing and my thing combined. And so, yeah, I think that energy of problem solving and interacting and, like, I think I like to kind of play and experiment with a lot of different ideas too. So anything I can do that kind of pushes things to like an edge of where does this thing break or where does it not quite work, is sort of a motivating factor. And I think, again, I'm sure, I'm sure I could talk to a therapist and that probably all goes right back to my childhood in that way. My girlfriend Catherine says, she says, I like to be in the room. I'm happy to be in the room as long as I can be participating in whatever's going on. I don't have to be necessarily the center of attention. And it's strange that with this project, I did kind of make it about me, but I have notes from even before I started this project of thinking what this would look like to do to somebody else. And then I think I just realized like no one else is going to do it. I have to do it. It's kind of that rule of the internet. If you come up with an idea that no one else has had, you sort of have to execute it. So yeah, I don't think too much about that motivation aspect, even though I'm sure it's there, but I do think that I'm kind of chasing that feeling that probably, it probably would help me out to understand it better. But I do find myself like, it's like, oh, if there's one other person, that's great. If there's two people, that's even better, and then at a certain size, it starts going down because then you're just at a party. But like, so, there's an ideal size somewhere in there of like what the kind of group size that I want to hang out with. And I think that's been something online that's really interesting as well. Like there's a MKmikeyM Slack channel and it's not everyone in there. It's not this overwhelming thing. And I think now we're, especially if you're in the Web3 space, you're on 1,000 different Discords. And the ones that are like too busy and too noisy kind of aren't as good as the ones that have that kind of just right group of, oh, there's enough people here that we can interact and all know each other and keep up with the conversation.
So then finally, looking ahead, I mean, you're not doing this full time, right? I mean, is this something that you could see yourself doing full time? And, when will you mentioned NFT as a potential project, but, like in theory, you said you would start this, maybe in crypto if you were to do it again. Have you thought about just transferring the shares into tokens, for example, and building this with kind of the technical kind of primitives that Web3 offers. And what else is in store for you over the next year? Like what are your plans?
Yeah, on the crypto side, I would love that because then I wouldn't have to run the market. Like right now, I have to run everything, all the parts of it, and now we've seen basically all of the elements that we coded ourselves are now functionalities that you can get, through snapshots and discords and, all these different elements. They all exist now in Web3. The marketplace where you can trade, automated market making, everything is there. I have a lot of shareholders that are really, really skeptical of crypto. Like, so there's this project called Fingerholders. It's an NFT project game that I'm working on with some friends that I put up for a vote, and it only passed with 66% support, because I had a lot of shareholders who said, I don't want to be around or touch anything crypto. And there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of fear, I think. And again, I think we've seen enough scams, hacks, etc. Like, it's, I'm sure as everyone in the space says, we're early, right? We don't know exactly how this stuff is going to work. So I think I'd have to get over that hump, and there's probably some education and explaining to do to get there. But I think the next year is going to be super interesting, because again, I'm going to have this new shareholder that's going to own, like a big, I think it's going to end up being like a 10 to 11% stake of, all the shareholders. And so that's a huge, huge difference. When I put something up further, this one person is going to have a massive say over which direction I go. And, again, I've stalked him a little bit online, so I know a little bit about him. And I'm like, but I don't know where he's going to fall on something like, if the vasectomy vote comes back, for example. I don't know what his opinion is, but he's going to have a big, big say in it. So it's going to be a really interesting year. The other things I'm excited about is just, I feel like the experience everyone else is getting in terms of learning about some of these, how to play with finance. Like, we can all make our own money now, and we can all do this. That fluency wasn't there when I started this project. Like, I had people that the first stock that they ever bought was me, like coming from kind of this arts and music and culture background in Portland, Oregon. And I was like, oh, that's a bad idea. You should diversify and buy something a little more stable. But it was an entry point for people. And I think we're seeing that with crypto now. And I think we're seeing a fluency in some of these economic things that we never saw before at a wider scale. And I think to me, that's super exciting, because I've played with this idea alone for long enough. And I do think now it's time to sort of, kind of invite a little bit more people and get it a little bit bigger and add more people to the room, so to speak.
Well, we wish you best of luck, Mike, and looking forward to seeing you kind of evolve this project. I mean, there's no end in sight, right? Is this a lifelong project for you?
I like to say it has to end in the spirit that it began. So it has to have like kind of a economic ending, whether that's a bankruptcy or a hostile takeover. It has to end. It has to mirror something in that world. So I don't know what that looks like. There have been times, it's been dark times, and I've thought about, just kind of walking away. But I think this project has been part of my life for so long now that it's really hard to imagine. I mean, sure, if you took it all away, I would still probably write down my decisions, on a full page before making them, because it's just become habit at this point. So, and one interesting thing is, like, what happens if something happens to me? Like, I would love for there to be a way for the shareholder community to continue, on somehow. I don't know what that looks like, but again, there's some interesting crypto angles on that, where like maybe this thing could continue and I wouldn't have to maintain a website, etc.
For sure. I'd be interested to see that move to the blockchain. Well, best of luck, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, you should buy some shares, so when I put the blockchain vote up, they'll have some sway.
Exactly. There it is. Solicitation. All right. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. Really good to talk to you.